Everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we're talking about our thoughts on the alleged RTX 3000 series design leaks, the Sony PlayStation 5 design that was officially unveiled this time. We'll be talking about Intel and AMD being indecisive as to who supports the bastard silicon that comprises Hades Canyon, and SLS side channel attacks for CPUs as well, alongside a bunch of other stuff like 4nm nodes and Lakefield. Before that, this video is brought to you by Team Group's T-Force Extreme ARGB memory, which uses a frosted finish on its heatsink to diffuse the lighting across the surface. The Extreme ARGB kits are available in various XMP configurations, including 3200 161818 and 4000 182222. If you're looking for an ARGB memory kit for your next build, check out the link in the description below for the T-Force Extreme memory. So first up for the news, we're sure that a lot of you have seen the NVIDIA RTX leaks already. There's been a 3080 and an alleged 3090 out there, at least those are the working names. These have been posted in various places. Chip Hell is one of them. Igor from Igor's Lab has been doing some of his own digging on some of this stuff and has posted his own opinions on it. And we're just going to talk about general thoughts from an industry perspective rather than going through the leaks, because there's not really enough there that it's hard to really commit to talking about it without being firmer in our understanding of what NVIDIA is doing. And it's also, for the most part, what we've seen is a cooler or a shroud design. So we're just going to give some thoughts on this. This issue first came to our attention in our Patreon Discord, which you can join by going to patreon.com/gamersnexus. But one of our members there posted the leaks of the dual fan solution where it had one fan on each side of the PCB. And in concept, this can be a good design. We're not sure if that's what NVIDIA will necessarily go with, or even that it's a real design. But if it is a real design, there's a few things to keep in mind here. One of them is that these companies go through a lot of different design iterations, especially the larger ones like NVIDIA and AMD, where there's designs of their reference cards that we'll never see in the public. There's probably dozens of them out there for the last couple generations that they were playing around with and they decided not to go with. So when a company makes a mock-up, like this one that was shown via the earlier leaks, typically what it does is it will either 3D print the first version of the shroud. We've seen that at some of the factories we've toured. Cooler Master, as an example, manufactures a lot of the cooling solutions for NVIDIA and makes them for AMD for the CPUs as well. But specifically, NVIDIA's Quadro stuff is all made by Cooler Master. You have some involvement from Foxconn making the PCBs, but Cooler Master does a lot of the cooling solution. And a lot of the time what they'll do, we've been to their factories, they'll have a 3D printer for some quick mock-ups in the very, very early stages of designing. And then they've got another solution where they'll go to a CNC shop or use their own. And once they've done the 3D print, they kind of have an idea of what they're doing. They next take the model to CNC work, where they use one of many different types of plastic that they have on hand and just sort of mill it out and make the non-functional design, so just the physical look of things to get an idea of how things line up and what it'll look like in 3D space. And then after that, you often see some early molds getting made. So this is one of the things that was brought up in the Patreon Discord, where people were asking us whether this might be guaranteed to exist because the tooling will already exist. So it could exist, it could not, in terms of public availability en masse. But the more important thing is that you don't use tooling to make a plastic shroud. In almost every instance, you'll use molds, and sometimes they do stuff like resin pouring and things like that too. But typically, you'll see a mold getting made. And for what it's worth, when we do our own products, like our toolkits, we get molds made as well. And for things like plastic tool handles, that's all done with the mold. You pour into it, and that's kind of the start and the end of it. It's not like a big metal tool that it has the insane high cost that case tooling does. Tooling is typically used for assembling things like chassis components, and heat sinks, like fin stacks, are stamped out with a giant tool on a big stamping press. We have factory footage we can probably drop in to show that. But that's where tooling's used. So molds, they can cost, the range is completely variable. For our newest version of the toolkit that we're getting restocked, that mold costs several $1,000s, whereas we have another product that's not announced yet, and that mold only costs $400. So it's all over the place in cost. And the point of saying this is that for a company like NVIDIA, they probably have a lot of different molds in flight where they just try them out. They probably even do some mechanical testing, some thermal and mechanical testing to see how the performance is, and then they'll decide on a final design. So the end result is that it's likely that multiple versions of these mockups exist, and they're not prohibitively expensive for a company like NVIDIA to make. And whether or not it comes into the field for use, we'll find out. If it comes out, then awesome, we'll take it apart. I would really look forward to specifically taking apart that dual-sided cooler, because that's very unique and different for a consumer space, and it'd be fun to look at. But I'm also not betting on it coming out. So that's what we know so far. It's very common for a lot of different versions of this to exist, and we probably just saw one of them. One other thing that's fun about all this is that it does open up the windows a bit as to what goes on at the companies when they're working on a new product. And so we can see some of the behind the scenes of, hey, maybe this is something that they're thinking about for the future, even if they don't deploy it this time. But that's just our thoughts on it and how some of the manufacturing side works. And of course, you can watch our cooler manufacturing facility tours if you want to learn more about it. Let's move on to the next one. The Sony PlayStation 5 design was unveiled in a recent press conference by Sony. So Sony has been locked in a waiting game with Microsoft, where both of them are sort of gauging the other one, trying to figure out when the prices will be announced. And in the meantime, we've had slow reveals from each party on their consoles and their games list for announcement. As usual, the internet has some thoughts on Sony's newest design for the PlayStation 5, which looks like, speaking with Patrick at GN, our thoughts were it sort of reminded us of those books you would find from maybe the 80s or the 90s that were about what life would be like in the 2000s, and they all had flying cars in them. That's kind of what the Sony PS5, it looks like it belongs in one of those books as an example of what a future computer would look like. Now, the internet has some very kind and forgiving comments as well about how the design looks. We've seen references to routers, humidifiers, we've seen euphemisms for anatomical componentry and things of that nature for the Sony PlayStation 5, but hey, it's a gaming audience, so that's kind of what you expect. At its Future of Gaming event, Sony made a slew of announcements, mostly in regards to titles coming from its first-party studios. It also offered a glimpse, again, of the PS5 hardware. The PS5 itself obviously was interesting, but Sony also showed off the DualSense controller and the Pulse 3D wireless headset, both of which are using a white coat of paint to match the aesthetic of Sony's new console itself. For the PS5 proper, as usual, it's probably an acquired taste. It's definitely more bold and aggressive than Microsoft's mini ITX-inspired design with the Xbox Series X, which looks more like something NZXT might make than a spaceship. The PS5, though, does have some interesting angles and curves. It's got blue lights, soft glow effect, and it appears to have vents along the perimeter of the interior, which are partially obscured by that white shroud. What we're concerned about primarily is the ventilation and airflow of the console, but our past leaked information has indicated that the console has spent disproportionately more on cooling than previous models. So we'll test it once it's in. We do plan to do thermals on this one. As with past models, the PS5 can be oriented vertically or horizontally. The PS5 will come in two models, at least initially. There's a fatter model, which has an optical drive, and then a slimmer version without the optical drive. There was no word on pricing. Sony noted that it's still planning to stick to a 2020 launch date, so it should be by end of year for holiday season. Sony also announced an enhanced and expanded edition of Grand Theft Auto 5, so we will never be able to escape that game. This comes on now about 10 years later, so nothing says welcome to 2021 like a game from 2013, which came out again in 2015 for PC. It's GTA 5 was, to our memory, one of the first games, or the first game, that surpassed $1 billion in revenue. It's absolutely insane, the amount of money and life that Rockstar has managed to squeeze out of that title. And it's still going. So we look forward to the 10-year anniversary where they'll have a remaster. But for now, GTA 5 will be on the PS5 if you're worried about that at all. Intel and AMD can't decide who should support the bastard silicon that both of them came together to make. Kaby Lake G was the once unfathomable collaboration between the two silicon giants, AMD and Intel, and it came together particularly in Hades Canyon, which is a product that we found extremely interesting. It was fun from an enthusiast standpoint and fun from an overclocking standpoint, and it combined both Intel and AMD components in one small box. That was one of the smaller NUCs that we've looked at. It seems that the silicon is caught in the middle of a spat between its parents, the arch rivals AMD and Intel, and the issue is over driver support, specifically which company is responsible for it. Kaby Lake G in Hades Canyon was paired with the AMD Radeon Vega M graphics solution. At the time, we praised Hades Canyon for its incredible power at the size. The processing power was was really pretty impressive. And we had a lot of fun overclocking it, even doing custom water cooling on it. Fast forward a few years though, and now Intel and AMD's collaboration is without proper driver support, as well as without an indication on if that will change. Intel defaulted support to AMD some time ago, and as Tom's Hardware reports in its write-up, AMD hasn't offered an updated driver package either, outside of the main Adrenalin 2020 suite. This will prevent Kaby Lake G systems from moving to the new Windows 10 version 2004 update. In Tom's Hardware's report, which is linked in our show notes document in the sources below, the company noted that it reached out to both Intel and AMD and requested comment from both of them for publication. Tom's, at the time of doing our news episode, has only received official comment from Intel, who wrote, quote, "We are working to bring back Radeon graphics driver support to Intel NUC 8 Extreme Mini PCs, previously codenamed Hades Canyon." And that's about all we know about the issue so far. SLS side channel attacks up next. This is one where Intel, were we to personify them, would probably be smiling right now, because for once, it's not the center of a story about security vulnerabilities in a news recap. The latest speculative execution flaws don't, in fact, affect Intel CPUs, but rather ARM v8A chips. And this is not the first time ARM has dealt with this either, but ARM's been less of a focus. So Spectre, for example, affected basically everyone, pretty much every CPU dating back at least 1 or 2 decades. And specifically affected Intel. There are multiple variants of Spectre, so Spectre is not just one exploit that is like some big umbrella for all these CPUs. It has variations that affect one or the other more. So AMD, for example, has been immune to several of the ones that affect only Intel. And ARM has barely been in this discussion within the mainstream space. ARM is now dealing with a new side channel attack, preying on chips based on the ARM v8A architecture. ARM actually claims that the new flaw, known as straight line speculation, or SLS, is a derivative of Spectre, where Spectre affects all chip manufacturers, again, mostly Intel, but the other two as well a bit. SLS is strictly aimed at ARM. SLS was discovered through research done at the Google SafeSide project and has been given the CVE 2020-13844 entry. According to ARM, SLS occurs when a processor speculatively executes instructions beyond what should be a change in control flow. When an ARM-based chip speculatively executes the next instructions linearly in memory past a point of change in control flow, writes the white paper that we've got on this, it could open up changes in the cache subsystem, offering a chance for an attacker to leak data. That's as far as we understand it anyway. While ARM says the security risk is low and such an attack would be hard to pull off in practice, it is offering mitigations nonetheless. So far, ARM has contributed patches to open source tooling and communities such as GCC, LLVM, Trusted Firmware A, Opti, FreeBSD, and OpenBSD. ARM notes that, in most cases, it doesn't expect a performance impact from the mitigations. Up next, TSMC is preparing an N4 4nm node for production. TSMC has recently announced that it will bridge its N5 and N3 process technologies with a 4nm N4 node. This announcement seemingly came out of left field because while TSMC has detailed its 5 and 3nm processes, 4nm has not yet been mentioned, at least until now. TSMC chairman Mark Liu told EE Times that, quote, N4 is an evolution of N5. We're already in business negotiations with customers on N4. So it was assumed that TSMC was going to skip 4nm on the road to 3nm, but it appears that that's not the case. On the surface, it seems as if the N4 node will serve as an iterative upgrade to TSMC's N5P. TSMC's N5P is itself an enhanced intranode upgrade from N5, similar to what TSMC has been doing at 7nm. See again N7, N7P, and N7+. It seems as if N4 will add another run in the ladder between N5P and N3, assuming TSMC doesn't take 5nm beyond N5P, but we'll see. TSMC's N5 has already hit risk production, and it did that last year, and it ramped in April of 2020. Apple and AMD are already rumored to be TSMC's premier customers for N5. Meanwhile, N5P is supposed to arrive in 2022, with N4 looking good for potentially 2023. And next up, more TSMC news, this time about Huawei, which has a couple of new challenges that it's facing that have complicated the relationship between TSMC and Huawei. TSMC has said that it's prepared for the loss of Huawei, and it doesn't want to lose Huawei or HiSilicon, But the U.S. blacklisting and the recently amended export rules from the U.S. Department of Commerce, which we talked about in the last news episodes, may force TSMC to drop Huawei whether it wants to or not. TSMC's chairman, the same one we just referenced for the previous story, Mark Liu, said that while TSMC hopes not to lose Huawei's business, it is prepared to, quote, replace it in a very short time if it does lose it. Leo went on to say that, quote, it's difficult for me to predict how fast it could be filled immediately. TSMC's obviously got a lot of demand. It's one of the leading silicon manufacturers right now, so they'd probably be fine. According to Leo, though, TSMC is still assessing how the new rules will affect the company and what implication they have for its business. Per the amended export rules, any foreign chip maker using American IP, technology, or equipment will have to apply for a license before supplying Huawei. TSMC has stated that it may apply for a license or an exemption. Right around the same time, too, that the U.S. Department of Commerce announced its new export rules, TSMC announced plans to build a $12 billion mega fab in Arizona, and that will probably be one of the political negotiation pieces in this discussion. Intel launching hybrid Lakefield CPUs. Intel has apparently run out of lakes to use for its names, and has run out of fields to use for its names and other processors, and so has combined the two into Lakefield, the new one that's being discussed today. Intel is finally releasing its Lakefield CPUs, which could prove to be its most interesting CPU line in years. Intel bills Lakefield as a hybrid x86 platform, and it uses Intel's new Foveros packaging technology, which we saw at an Intel event a couple of years ago. Foveros allows Intel to mix and match various IP blocks with different memory and I/O elements within a 3D package. One of the highlights of Foveros is pairing big cores with little cores. Foveros is also similar to AMD's chiplet approach in that Intel is mixing different dies, such as 10 nanometer package dies and 22 nanometer I/O dies for Lakefield. We normally don't, actually we specifically make it a point to not show a lot of the press kits that are sent out. Sometimes they end up on the shelf back here like that wooden Ryzen box once they're old and no longer too relevant. But Intel sent over an unofficial Lego kit for this particular launch that actually does a decent job of kind of trying to illustrate what's going on. So maybe we'll take a shot of that for this. But the idea is packaging multiple pieces of silicon together, which is probably the way of the future. NVIDIA wrote a white paper on multi-chip modules many years ago about how they saw this as the way forward. And AMD obviously has executed on that extremely well with Ryzen, because it helps control cost when you're not making one giant monolithic die. There's a lot fewer things that can go wrong in the fab process, so your yields are better. That means the cost is better, and that in some cases gets passed to the consumer, like you see with Ryzen desktop. And it also sort of reduces the complications on the supply and demand issues where Intel has had so much demand of 14 nanometer that it can't make enough. And it's had supply issues with 10 nanometer that it obviously can't make enough or even make it work in the instance of, I don't know, about 5 years of waiting for 10 nanometer. So this is the way forward. The first two products using Foveros are the Intel Core i3 L13G4 and Core i5 L16G7. So when we complained for about a year now about Intel's naming schemes getting worse, it seems that the company took it upon itself to further that and make sure we really struggled to remember any. I literally don't remember the names I just said. L13G4 and L16G7. So these are the names we're using going forward. Both of these SKUs will pair one big 10 nanometer Sunny Cove solution with 4 of these smaller Tremont cores. So Tremont mixed with Sunny Cove. Sunny Cove is something we talked about at a December event, and I want to say 2018 for maybe 2017 for Intel's upcoming Foveros technology, and it's getting combined here. We know these are Intel's first chips shipping with package-on-package or POP memory and a standby SoC power as little as 2.5 milliwatts, but Intel hasn't really detailed the new chips heavily beyond that. The chips will come with 4 megabytes of cache, Gen 11 graphics with up to 64 EUs, and they also have a package area of 12 by 12 by 1, or roughly the size of a US dime. Intel states that this is possible by stacking 2 logic dies and 2 layers of DRAM, which eliminates the need for external memory. Lakefield packs support for LPDDR4X of up to 4266, although it's unclear how much memory the chips will actually support and capacity. Initially, Lakefield will power 2 designs shipping this year, the Samsung Galaxy Book S and the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Fold. It'll be interesting, though, to see what's under the hood with Lakefield and how Intel is planning to make it work. Sunny Cove and Tremont obviously use different architectures and support different instruction sets. Intel notes that there's hardware-guided OS scheduling to funnel the right jobs to the right cores, but we'd like to know more about how the cores work individually. Up next, an internet service provider story, something with which we've had a lot of our own personal experience over the years. Cox Communications is apparently slowing internet speeds for entire neighborhoods to mitigate what it calls, quote, excessive usage on a neighborhood level, not just an individual level now. That's what's new here. What's more, Ars Technica reports that Cox Communications has imposed these kinds of slowdowns across neighborhoods in the past. And further, although Cox won't say how many users are needed to be excessive in their internet usage to result in a neighborhood-wide throttle, it looks like this is something that's actually happening now. So Ars Technica details the story of Mike, a Cox customer from Florida. Mike was apparently warned about his excessive use before his ISP, because I'm getting tired of saying that name, slowed the upload speeds on his gigabit plan from 35 megabits per second to 10 megabits per second for him and the rest of the neighborhood. According to Mike, who spoke with Ars, his internet usage was between 8 terabytes to 12 terabytes a month. Furthermore, according to Mike, this wasn't unusual data consumption for him, but his ISP only recently flagged his account in May. Ars reports that Mike is currently paying $150 per month for this gigabit plan, which includes an additional $50 per month for unlimited data, in big air quotes there, because it often is in air quotes. That would allow him to go beyond Cox's arbitrary 1 terabyte data cap. According to Ars, Mike's usage consists of scheduled device backups and, quote, data sharing via various encrypted information sharing protocols between the non-peak hours of 1 a.m. and 8 a.m. So he's trying to be out of the way of the rest of the neighborhood. Again, Mike states that this has been his normal internet usage for the last 4 years. The fact that Cox only recently flagged his account and issued slowdowns is no doubt suggesting that Cox is struggling under spiking internet traffic, thanks to a certain human malware issue right now. However, Cox is reluctant to admit that it's having issues keeping up with the internet demand, as all ISPs would be. In fact, the company recently told Ars that its network was, quote, performing very well overall. Mike initially started to receive phone calls about his usage, and when he called Cox to discuss it, he was told to lower his monthly usage or have his account terminated. Quote, I tried to explain that my usage is not out of the ordinary for me. My daytime bandwidth usage is paltry. Most of my bandwidth consumption is scheduled from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m., and that Cox should have been upgrading their infrastructure instead of oversubscribing nodes and pocketing the record revenue. I was told that if I did not make a substantial decrease in my upload data usage, my service would be terminated. Unfortunately, oversubscribing nodes and pocketing the profit has been the American ISP buffet of choice for years. It's like the golden corral, the pig trough, if you will, of how ISPs operate. So we'd like to acknowledge that Mike's response is especially on point here, particularly that point. So in a later email, his ISP stated that Mike and his neighbors would be getting neutered upload speeds altogether. So just to get this straight, Cox Communications, the internet company Cox, is neutering the speeds that it is providing to its customers. And Ars Technica is reporting on all of this. We've got a good mix of names today to really challenge the demonetization algorithm. Quote, during these unprecedented times, many people are working and schooling from home, and maintaining connectivity is important. We are working to provide a positive internet experience for everyone. So we've adjusted our gigablast upload speeds, that's a marketing term, in your neighborhood from 35 megabits per second to 10 megabits per second, now through July 15th, 2020. Your download speeds have not changed, reads the email. This is normally the point at which some commenters would let us know about how ISPs don't need regulation, free market, etc. However, as Ars points out, the net neutrality framework had built-in exemptions known as reasonable network management specifically that likely would have applied to the current circumstances that ISPs are dealing with right now. See again, human malware levels of internet traffic. So Cox didn't answer Ars' questions as to why the company is struggling with heavy internet traffic, but we can probably all guess. And it's not even really a bad thing that they are struggling with it. It's kind of expected. It's just the way they're dealing with it is the bad part. Up next, in a bit of unexpected news this week, but important news, Jim Keller has resigned his position at Intel effective June 11th, 2020. Keller's resignation is, quote, due to personal reasons with no further discussion of them. With his resignation, Keller ends a 2-year stint at Intel after being hired as Intel's senior vice president of the Silicon Engineering Group. Keller is a brilliant engineer and has been in the industry for a long time. He's got a history with a number of high-profile tech companies, including AMD, working there a bit before the Ryzen launch really started to take hold in the public, and also including Tesla as another example. So Keller is someone you want working at your company if you make anything like a CPU or similar to it. Keller is well known as a processor engineer. Again, past tenures include Apple, AMD, and Tesla, just to name a few. Intel's press briefing notes that while Keller has resigned, he will act in a consulting capacity for 6 months to help ease the transition. Dr. Ian Cutress confirmed that while Keller is consulting for the next 6 months, he'll be doing so exclusively for Intel. Intel also noted that some of its leadership will be changing with this. So from Intel's press release, we know that Sundari Mitra, the former CEO and founder of NetSpeed Systems, and the current leader of Intel's configurable intellectual property and chassis group, will lead a newly created IP engineering group focused on developing what it calls best-in-class IP. The next person named was Gene Scuteri, and I'm not sure of the pronunciation, my apologies, who is an accomplished engineer leader in the semiconductor industry, will now be heading the Xeon and Network Engineering Group. And then Daman Hejmadi will return to leading the Client Engineering Group, focused on system-on-chip or SoC execution and designing next-generation client, device, and chipset products. Hejmadi has over 2 decades of experience leading teams delivering advanced SoCs both inside and outside Intel, according to the press release. So Keller here is going to be a big loss for Intel's engineering group. Keller does, for what it's worth, have a history of sort of moving around between the companies based on when a project ends. In the truest sense of being a brilliant engineer, Keller goes to tackle a project, solves the problems, and then moves on to the next one. So this isn't something that's wholly unexpected in that we would expect Keller to leave at some point. He doesn't really have a history of, for the most part, staying places for, say, a decade. He kind of gets the project done. But we haven't seen or can't recall a time when the reasoning for the departure has been for personal reasons. So obviously we wish Keller the best, and we'll hopefully follow up on what he's working on next soon. And finally, a special thanks to our viewers, because last week we had a really not fun story that I personally had to deal with on Twitter, because a person on Twitter whom we've never met and has a bit of a platform erroneously and incorrectly linked one of our writers to a writer who shares the same name to a pretty gross article that was written on another publication. So another publication published an article that we in no way agree with, and that article was written by someone who has the same name as our news writer, Eric Hamilton, who writes our hardware news episodes and has done so for a couple of years now. So to be very clear, we already made this clear on Twitter, but our Eric Hamilton at Gamers Nexus, the one who does our news write-ups, is not the same one who wrote the other article. And this might shock a lot of people, but with about 8 billion people on the earth, some of them do in fact have the same name. The issue was resolved. Yeah, just to be really clear, that wasn't us. We were in no way affiliated with the other publication. Literally the only link is that the name is shared between 2 writers, but it's not the same person. And it also gets linked back to an SEO spam site that just crawls the internet for writers' names, then attributes all the articles under one profile that person didn't actually authorize the creation of, which gets into a data privacy discussion as well, something that the EU has been pretty good about. So yeah, thanks again to our viewers who jumped in and helped point people towards my tweets from the GN account that we were not affiliated with this. We really appreciate you spreading the word and making sure that our guy, Eric, wasn't blamed for something he had no involvement in, and we appreciate your support, and Eric, of course, does as well. He does phenomenal work, And both Eric and I want no affiliation with what was trying to be pegged on us for something that someone else did. So thank you all for supporting us and helping us spread the message that we were the wrong guy. So that's it for this one. Subscribe for more. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly by buying things like the mouse mats, which are on back order because we sold through them so fast, but they're on their way back in. Or you can grab the mod mats, and patreon.com/gamersnexus if you want to join that Discord I mentioned earlier. We'll see you all next time.